On the evening of Friday, November 29, 2024, in a quiet street of Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, a strange and humorous incident unfolded. A light drizzle had just stopped, and the air had turned cool and comfortable. Yet, amidst the calm atmosphere, a car rolled by with a broken headlight, leading to an unforgettable exchange between the female driver and the police officer, which kicked off a series of events that would become a hilarious story at future gatherings with friends. It was an ordinary, quiet evening in the city when Officer Thompson, cruising down a deserted street, suddenly noticed a car moving with a faulty headlight. It seemed like an insignificant moment, but for someone like Thompson, every small detail could signal a larger problem. His attention sharpened as he saw Melissa's car approaching. One headlight blazed brightly, like a beacon guiding the way through the dark, while the other flickered weakly, almost as if signaling distress, a clear sign that something was amiss. The dim light blinked out naturally, creating an image that was both comical and suspicious. The city, at this particular hour, was its usual self-quiet, almost eerily peaceful, with only the soft hum of distant traffic breaking the stillness. To an outsider, it might seem like just another uneventful evening in the neighborhood. But for Officer Thompson, a seasoned member of the Palm Beach Gardens police force, every flicker of light, every change in a car's behavior, and every small anomaly on the road told a story. It wasn't just about catching speeders or enforcing laws, it was about paying attention to the details that others might overlook, the little signs that could mean much more than they appeared. And in this moment, it was the faint, flickering headlight of a passing car that caught his eye. While most drivers would pass this off as a minor mechanical glitch, Thompson's trained instincts recognized it as something that demanded further scrutiny. The light was far from consistent, almost as if it were sending out a signal, a silent cry for help. It wasn't just the faulty bulb, the erratic flicker felt deliberate, like the car was trying to draw attention perhaps not to itself, but to something else hidden beneath the surface. Was the car experiencing technical difficulties, or was the driver simply too distracted or careless to notice the problem? Or maybe, just maybe, there was more going on than met the eye. For Thompson, who had stopped hundreds of cars over his years of service, a malfunctioning headlight wasn't a rare occurrence. It was one of those common violations that drivers seem to forget about, often citing a vague intention to fix it someday. But this particular situation, the way the light danced and refused to stay steady, nagged at him. There was something about it that felt different, like a clue waiting to be uncovered. With the slightest shift in his focus, he could already feel the tension in the air, like a story unfolding, hidden behind the seemingly innocuous issue of a broken headlight. Whatever this was, Thompson knew it had the potential to spiral into something unexpected. When he finally made the decision to pull over Melissa's car, he did so with a mix of routine expectation and quiet anticipation. As the flashing lights illuminated the vehicle, his mind wandered to the countless times he'd heard variations of the same excuses. "I swear I'm fixing it," or "I've been meaning to get around to it." These were phrases he had grown far too familiar with over the years, standard responses that had become almost laughably predictable in the face of every headlight-related violation. At this point, Thompson was almost certain this would be no different. Another minor issue, another quick interaction, and then back to business as usual. But when Melissa rolled down her window and immediately admitted that the headlight was indeed broken and that she was working on fixing it, something about her delivery made him pause. It wasn't the typical defensive or dismissive tone that he had come to expect from most drivers. Instead, it was almost as if she was offering up the information too easily, like she had rehearsed it, or perhaps she simply felt a little too comfortable. To Thompson, it was a simple enough statement, yet it felt all too familiar. He'd heard these words hundreds of times before, each one tinged with the same lack of conviction. "I'm fixing it" was often just a half-hearted excuse, a flimsy shield for drivers who had neglected a minor issue until it was too late. It was a quick fix they promised themselves they'd get around to, only to be forgotten as soon as they hit the road again. And yet, as Melissa spoke, Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that there was more beneath the surface. The word fixing might as well have been a red flag, something that didn't quite add up. Officer Thompson had enough experience to recognize that what might seem like a trivial violation could often lead to something far more complex. With every passing second, he found himself leaning in, waiting for the story to unfold, because deep down, he knew this was more than just a simple broken headlight. It was the beginning of something he hadn't quite figured out yet, but he was determined to uncover. With his experience, Officer Thompson quickly realized that this was one of those situations where he needed to be patient, and sometimes a little leniency was necessary to avoid complicating things further. After all, Melissa was polite and cooperative, so he decided not to escalate the situation, issuing a light warning instead. He understood that sometimes minor violations didn't need to turn into bigger problems, especially when the driver was cooperating and not causing any trouble. However, deep down, he couldn't help but feel a little skeptical about such explanations, as they often lacked the actual action to fix the problem. But with Melissa, he decided to let things slide for the moment. The story started to get more interesting when, after asking Melissa for her registration and insurance, Officer Thompson hoped to finish the paperwork quickly. These were the mundane tasks police officers often had to deal with during traffic stops, and from his experience, he expected the process to go smoothly. However, things didn't go as planned. When Melissa responded to his request, instead of handing over the usual valid documents, she unexpectedly revealed something that caught him off guard. "Oh, I have some driftwood in the car," she said with a proud smile. "You know, I just picked up some driftwood. It's very artistic." Melissa's spontaneous and unpredictable comment left Officer Thompson surprised. He thought to himself, driftwood? Is she really saying driftwood? He couldn't help but smile as he tried to maintain his professionalism. With a curious look, he continued, "So, besides the driftwood, is there anything else in the car I should know about?" Melissa responded without missing a beat. "No, nothing else, officer. Just the driftwood and some hand sanitizer. I'm very clean." Her answer was not only humorous, it also reflected Melissa's fun and easygoing nature. She seemed to treat being pulled over by the police as an opportunity to make things more interesting rather than a stressful situation. In this situation, Melissa turned what should have been a routine traffic stop into a memorable moment, while also managing to make Officer Thompson fight to hold back his amusement. Despite being an experienced officer, he couldn't help but feel slightly bewildered by her approach. The story about the driftwood not only lightened the mood with a humorous moment in their exchange, but also revealed Melissa's personality, a woman unperturbed by the seriousness of the situation, always looking to inject some comfort with unexpected, sometimes quirky, yet endearing remarks. When Officer Thompson began writing the citation, a noticeable shift appeared on Melissa's face. Initially, she had remained calm, but as time passed, her patience slowly drained, replaced by palpable frustration. Each passing second felt like an eternity to Melissa, who began to feel that the stop was becoming more absurd and unnecessary. She stared at Officer Thompson, her growing irritation impossible to hide, and then spoke up with a tone full of skepticism. "Why is this taking so long? It's just a headlight. You're overreacting." Melissa's feelings in that moment are understandable. She never intended to break the law, and aside from a broken headlight, there was nothing serious at play. Though why should she have to spend her entire evening dealing with this? To her, being pulled over and given a citation for such a minor issue felt like a huge inconvenience. Each minute that ticked by only heightened her sense of frustration, as she felt caught in a pointless procedure with no legitimate reason. While Officer Thompson could sense Melissa's irritation, he maintained a professional demeanor. "It's a vehicle equipment violation, ma'am. We're doing this for the safety of everyone," he explained calmly. While his explanation was rational and logical, it wasn't exactly what Melissa wanted to hear at that moment. She didn't see herself as a danger, and the idea of being harassed over such a minor issue only fueled her frustration. Officer Thompson's response seemed to only intensify her weariness and anger, as she couldn't fathom why the police were treating the situation with such seriousness. As Officer Thompson continued his work, Melissa began to feel as though she was the target of a baseless check, and her discomfort was becoming more difficult to hide. "Safe," she repeated, her voice thick with disbelief. "I just want to go home. Do you know how many people drive with broken headlights without being stopped? This feels like harassment." When Melissa erupted in her frustration, Officer Thompson could only nod, trying to keep his composure and maintain a calm atmosphere. However, inside, he silently wished for the stop to end quickly. Yet, his silent prayer was interrupted when Officer Davis, a colleague, arrived. With a more serious air, Davis brought with him a new concern: could Melissa be intoxicated? And this seemed to be the next step in this messy encounter. "Can you step out of the vehicle, please?" Officer Davis asked, his tone neutral, but carrying the authority of someone who had heard all sorts of excuses before. Melissa reacted immediately, as though he had asked her to step into a pit of snakes. "What? No. I haven't done anything wrong. It's just a headlight. I'm not getting out of the car." Her response was like a punch in the air, filled with exhaustion and frustration, as though she were being treated unjustly. At this point, Officer Thompson and Officer Davis worked together to convince Melissa to comply with the request for a sobriety test, but she steadfastly refused, her emotions growing more intense by the second. "Are you kidding me? You want me to do tests right here in the street? Are you trying to embarrass me? This is harassment," she yelled, pointing at the officers, her voice thick with anger and disbelief. Melissa's words revealed the internal conflict she was facing. She was trying to assert that she hadn't done anything wrong, while also feeling unfairly attacked by a situation she deemed trivial: a broken headlight. She not only refused the officer's request, but also considered it an affront to her dignity, as though being asked to perform simple roadside tests was an invasion of her personal space and rights. In her reaction, we can see Melissa's utter frustration with a situation she believed was entirely unjust. She didn't understand why she had been pulled over for such a minor issue and felt overwhelmed by the power dynamic with the officers. This wasn't just a clash between a citizen and law enforcement, it reflected the underlying tension between the enforcement of the law and an individual's sense of fairness in what seemed like an innocuous situation. And this passage, the escalating tension between Melissa and the officers, is depicted vividly, showing how the situation escalates from a simple traffic stop into an emotional and confrontational standoff. Officer Davis' statement, "I need to make sure you're fit to drive," was a standard request when there's suspicion of intoxication, but also underscored the seriousness with which he approached the safety of the community. Yet Melissa's reaction was one of outrage and disbelief. "Fit to drive? I'm fine. I just have a headlight out, that's all." Her response was not just a protest against the officer's request, but also a clear expression of her feeling of being unfairly bothered. To her, a broken headlight didn't warrant this kind of scrutiny, and she felt as though she was being mistreated, despite not having committed any serious wrongdoing. Her emotions became more intense. She began to cry out about abuse of power and shouting about police brutality, even though all the officer had asked was for her to step out of the car for a sobriety check. This clearly highlighted Melissa's psychological stress. She felt she was being treated unjustly. In her eyes, the actions of the police weren't about safety, they were a violation of her personal rights. Her screaming about police brutality signified her desperate attempt to reclaim control over the situation, as if to insist that she was the victim and everything around her was a misunderstanding. This reaction also pointed to her loss of composure and the confusion she was experiencing. The situation only intensified as Melissa spat twice on Officer Davis, her actions escalating from passive resistance to outright defiance. She not only refused to cooperate, but also acted aggressively, making the situation more volatile and harder to manage. Officer Davis' shocked response, "You just spat on me," conveyed both his anger and disbelief at the disrespectful act. In the chaos of the moment, Melissa shifted from mere resistance to a completely unhinged and irrational response. She kept yelling, "Police brutality! Help! Help! These people are crazy! I didn't do anything wrong!" Her screams were not only expressions of rage but also attempts to rally support, as if to claim her innocence and portray herself as the victim of an unjust system. Her frantic cries underscored her loss of control, reflecting a state of utter confusion and panic. This entire passage encapsulates the dramatic progression of the situation, from a simple traffic violation to an emotional and combative encounter. Every word and action from Melissa is a reflection of her escalating dissatisfaction with the officers and also of her psychological unraveling in a scenario she perceived as entirely unreasonable. "Ma'am, you're going to need to calm down," Officer Thompson advised, his voice steady but firm. "This is not helping your situation." This wasn't just a casual piece of advice, it was a warning that the situation was escalating fast. Instead of calming down, Melissa became even more frantic, her face a picture of anger and frustration. With every attempt to wiggle free, scream, and protest, things only seemed to get worse. By this point, nothing could stop her. She resorted to using the only weapon she felt she had control over, her saliva. Without hesitation, she spat on the officer not once, but twice. It was as though spitting was the only way Melissa could fight back against what she perceived as an injustice, being stopped for something as trivial as a broken headlight. "I didn't do anything wrong," she screamed repeatedly, her voice sharp with indignation. "I'm just trying to go home." Her words sounded more like a broken record than a defense, as she continued to resist and cause chaos during the entire traffic stop. The officers struggled to keep her under control, wrestling to calm her down, but all they received in return were defiant shouts and angry actions. What Melissa didn't realize was that her resistance wasn't just intensifying the situation. What began as a routine stop for a busted headlight had now snowballed into a series of more serious offenses. After the struggle ended and they finally got her into the squad car, a search of her vehicle revealed much more than just driftwood. With a mix of curiosity and careful inspection, the officers found something unexpected: cannabis and a few cold beers still chilled by the air conditioning. It was like a surprise gift on a night that Melissa surely didn't plan for. "Looks like the driftwood wasn't the only thing she was picking up," Officer Thompson said, rolling his eyes as he processed the additional evidence. "Great," he sighed, continuing to fill out the paperwork to charge her with more severe offenses: driving under the influence, resisting arrest, and battery on a law enforcement officer. The cold, metal handcuffs tightened around her wrists, a stark reminder of the consequences of her rash actions. As for Melissa, while she may be presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, one thing was certain: she wouldn't be winning any awards for her public behavior. Maybe next time, she'd fix that headlight before hitting the road, or at least remember to keep her hands and spit under control. In the end, despite Melissa's insistence that she hadn't done anything wrong, her defiance and impulsive actions only made matters worse. She now faced charges far more serious than a broken headlight, including DUI, resisting arrest, and assaulting a police officer. This was more than just a lesson in respecting the law. It was a reminder of how important it is to stay calm in tense situations. Right or wrong, excessive resistance rarely leads to positive outcomes, only complicating things further. The biggest takeaway here is that sometimes small actions like fixing a headlight before leaving home or controlling emotions in high-stress moments can prevent bigger problems down the road. Life is full of challenges, but how we handle them will ultimately shape the outcome.